Blood on a crisp white apron is a hell of a way to end a shift. But when you work at a restaurant favored by the city's underworld, you learn not to ask questions. People whispered about Isabella Moretti. They called her the Black Widow in training a spoiled, terrifying heir to a criminal empire who had hospitalized 3 bodyguards and driven 2 therapists into early retirement. She was untouchable, unhinged, and completely out of control. Nobody looked her in the eye. Nobody except a broke, exhausted waitress working a double shift who had simply run out of fear. This is the story of how a spilled glass of Cabernet changed the hierarchy of the city's most dangerous crime family forever. The Obsidian Room was the kind of restaurant where the price of a steak could pay a month's rent, and the patrons often carried weapons wrapped in tailor-made silk suits. Kezia Bennett hated working the closing shift. At 24, her life was a repeating loop of carrying heavy trays, avoiding the wandering hands of arrogant businessmen, and calculating how many more shifts she needed to cover her mother's staggering oncology bills. It was 11:30 p.m. on a Tuesday when the atmosphere in the dining room flatlined. The low hum of jazz and clinking crystal died the moment the heavy mahogany doors swung open. The maitre d', a usually unflappable man named Gregory, physically paled. 4 massive men in dark suits stepped in, fanning out to secure the perimeter. Then she walked in. Isabella Moretti. She wasn't just the daughter of Gwen Moretti, the undisputed head of the West Coast Syndicate. She was his enforcer, his wild card, and his biggest liability. Isabella possessed a sharp, striking beauty. Dark hair, cut in a sleek, asymmetric bob, piercing hazel eyes, and a jawline that could cut glass. She wore a tailored crimson pantsuit that practically screamed danger. The rumors about her were legendary. She had allegedly burned down a rival's nightclub just because she didn't like the bouncer, and she had a temper so volatile her own father's captains avoided being in the same room as her. Kezia was stationed at Section 4, wiping down a table, completely exhausted. Her feet throbbed, and she was operating on 3 hours of sleep. Isabella bypassed the VIP booths and sat directly at Table 12, Kezia's section. "I'll take the filet. Rare. If it's medium rare, I'm making the chef eat it raw," Isabella told Gregory, not even bothering to look at a menu. 20 minutes later, Kezia approached the table, balancing the heavy silver tray. As she set the plate down, one of Isabella's massive guards bumped into Kezia's elbow. It wasn't entirely his fault, but the shift in weight was enough. A full glass of vintage Cabernet Sauvignon tipped over, splashing directly onto the lapel of Isabella's pristine crimson jacket. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the jazz pianist stopped playing. One of the guards instinctively reached inside his jacket. Isabella slowly looked down at the dark stain blooming on her suit, then up at Kezia. Her hazel eyes were practically glowing with malice. "Do you have any idea?" Isabella whispered, her voice a deadly, quiet hiss. "How much this jacket costs? It costs more than your miserable life." Gregory was already sprinting over stammering apologies. "Miss Moretti, I am so sorry she's fired. We will pay for—" "Shut up!" Isabella snapped, standing up. She grabbed the edge of the table, preparing to flip it, a signature move that usually preceded someone getting severely hurt. But Kezia didn't flinch. She was too tired to be terrified. The crushing weight of the past 3 years, the hospital bills, the eviction notices, the endless grind, suddenly crystallized into a single moment of absolute reckless defiance. Kezia slammed her service tray onto the adjacent table with a loud crack. "Don't you dare flip that table," Kezia said. Her voice wasn't loud, but the sheer icy authority in it made the guard freeze. Isabella blinked, genuinely taken aback. "Excuse me." I said, "Don't. I've been on my feet for 14 hours. I have to clean up this section. Your guard bumped my arm, which spilled the wine. I will get you club soda for the stain, and I will comp the steak. But if you throw a tantrum and make a mess on my floor, I will make you wipe it up yourself." Gregory looked like he was going to pass out. The guards tensed, waiting for Isabella's order to drag the waitress into the alley. Isabella stared at Kezia. She looked at the tired bags under Kezia's eyes, the set of her jaw, the complete lack of trembling in her hands. Everyone trembled around Isabella. Everyone. But this girl in a stained apron was looking at her like she was a misbehaving toddler. For 10 agonizing seconds, the restaurant held its breath. Then the corners of Isabella's mouth twitched. She let go of the table. "Club soda," Isabella said softly, leaning back into her chair. "And bring extra napkins. You made a mess, waitress." Kezia held her gaze for a second longer, nodded once, and walked away. She didn't realize it then, but she had just passed a test no one else had ever survived. Kezia expected to be fired. She expected to walk to her rusted Honda Civic in the alley and find her tires slashed or worse. Instead, she finished her shift in peace. But the real consequence arrived at 8 a.m. the next morning. A black armored SUV was idling outside Kezia's dilapidated apartment building. 2 men in suits were waiting by the steps. One of them held out a thick manila envelope. "Miss Bennett, Mr. Moretti would like a word." Kezia's heart dropped into her stomach. Gwen Moretti. The boss. She was driven to an estate in the hills that looked less like a home and more like a fortress. Armed men patrolled the perimeter with tactical rifles. Kezia was escorted through a grand foyer, dripping with marble and gold, straight into a dimly lit, cigar-smoke-filled study. Gwen Moretti sat behind a massive oak desk. He looked older than his pictures, tired, with silver hair and eyes as hard as flint. Standing in the corner was his underboss, Silas Croft, a man known for making problems disappear in the middle of the night. "Sit," Gwen commanded. Kezia sat, keeping her posture rigid to hide her shaking hands. Gwen tossed a file onto the desk. Kezia Marie Bennett, 24. Mother in St. Jude's, dealing with stage 3 lymphoma. You owe the hospital roughly $42,000. You're 3 months behind on rent, and your credit score is a tragedy. Kezia flushed. "If you brought me here to kill me over a spilled drink, just do it. But my life insurance goes to my mother. Make sure she gets it." Gwen laughed. It was a rough, barking sound. Silas remained utterly still. "I didn't bring you here to kill you, Kezia. I brought you here to offer you a job." Gwen leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "My daughter Isabella. You met her last night." "I did. Isabella is difficult. Since her mother passed, she has become a liability. She is reckless. She has fired, fought, or slept with every handler, bodyguard, and assistant I've assigned to her. She doesn't respect authority because she knows I won't kill my own flesh and blood. She lives in a world where everyone bends to her will." Gwen pointed a thick finger at Kezia. "But last night she didn't bend you. Gregory told me you treated her like a street dog, and instead of biting, she sat." "I was just doing my job," Kezia said defensively. "I want you to do a new job. I want you to be Isabella's personal handler. You will live in this house. You will go where she goes. You will keep her schedule. Keep her out of the press. And most importantly, keep her from doing anything stupid. I'm a waitress, Mr. Moretti. I'm not a babysitter for the mob." "I will pay off your mother's medical debt today," Gwen said smoothly. "All 42,000. Gone." and I will pay you $10,000 a week to live here and keep my daughter in line. All you have to do is not back down." Keziah felt the air leave her lungs. 10,000 a week. Her mother's debt erased. It was a deal with the devil, but Keziah was already living in hell. "What if she tries to hurt me?" Keziah asked, her voice quiet. "She will try," Gwen replied bluntly. "But I will make it clear to her that if she lays a finger on you, I will freeze her trusts and take her cars. Your job is to handle her mind, Keziah. Break her ego before she breaks this family." Keziah looked at the file, then at the mob boss. "I need weekends off to see my mom." Gwen smiled a genuine predatory smile. "Welcome to the family, Miss Bennett." Moving into the Moretti estate was like moving into a gilded cage. Keziah was given a suite in the East Wing that was larger than her entire apartment. Her mother's debt had vanished overnight, confirmed by a tearful phone call from the hospital billing department. But the honeymoon phase ended the moment Isabella found out. It was day 2. Keziah was in the kitchen, making a cup of cheap instant coffee she had smuggled in when the doors violently swung open. Isabella stormed in, wearing silk pajamas and an expression of pure, unadulterated fury. "You!" Isabella snarled, marching right into Keziah's personal space. She smelled of expensive perfume and gin. "You think you can just move into my house? You think my father can buy me a pet to keep me on a leash?" Keziah calmly stirred her coffee. "Good morning, Isabella. Your father has a meeting for you with the estate lawyers at 11. I suggest you get dressed." Isabella swiped her hand across the marble island, knocking Keziah's coffee mug to the floor. It shattered dark liquid, pooling on the pristine white tiles. "I don't take orders from the help," Isabella whispered, leaning in so close Keziah could feel the heat radiating from her. "I will make your life a living hell. I will break you so fast you'll be begging my father to let you go back to pouring wine for tips." Keziah looked down at the broken mug, then back up at Isabella. Her heart was racing, but she clamped down on the fear. "Don't back down. That's the only rule." "I've dealt with worse messes than this," Keziah said, grabbing a roll of paper towels. She ripped a few off and held them out to the Mafia princess. "Clean it up, then get dressed." Isabella stared at the paper towels like they were venomous snakes. "Are you insane? No, I'm your handler, and until you start acting like an adult instead of a brat throwing a tantrum, this is how we're going to communicate. Clean it up." For a second, Keziah thought Isabella might actually strike her. The tension in the kitchen was thick enough to cut with a knife. Isabella's fists were clenched white. But Keziah didn't blink. She held the paper towels steady. "You're going to regret this," Isabella hissed. But she snatched the towels from Keziah's hand, dropped to her knees, and aggressively wiped at the spilled coffee. She threw the soaked wads into the trash and stormed out of the kitchen without another word. The psychological warfare escalated over the next 2 weeks. Isabella was relentless. She played loud, heavy metal music at 3 a.m. outside Keziah's door. She intentionally scheduled and then skipped appointments. She drove her Porsche at terrifying speeds through the winding cliffside roads, trying to make Keziah scream from the passenger seat. Keziah never screamed. She simply clutched the door handle and reviewed Isabella's schedule out loud over the roar of the engine. The turning point came on a rainy Thursday night. Isabella had been summoned to a business dinner with her father and the leaders of the rival Calabrese family. Keziah was told to wait in the SUV. 2 hours into the dinner, gunfire erupted from the restaurant. Panic seized the street. Keziah watched as Gwen's men scrambled. A moment later, the restaurant doors blew open, and Silas dragged Isabella out by her arm, shoving her into the back of the SUV next to Keziah before slamming the door. "Drive!" Silas roared at the driver. The SUV peeled out into the rain. Keziah turned to look at Isabella, expecting her to be barking orders or cursing. Instead, Isabella was pressed against the far door. Her knees pulled to her chest. She was hyperventilating, her eyes wide and unfocused. Blood, not hers but someone else's, was spattered across her white silk blouse. The terrifying Black Widow, the ruthless heir, was having a full-blown panic attack. "Isabella," Keziah said softly. Isabella flinched violently. "Don't touch me. Get away," she gasped, clawing at her own throat like she couldn't breathe. Keziah didn't listen. She slid across the leather seat. She didn't act like a handler or an employee. She acted like someone who had spent years soothing a sick mother through agonizing nights. Keziah reached out and firmly grasped both of Isabella's trembling hands. "Look at me," Keziah ordered, her voice completely devoid of judgment. "Isabella, look at my eyes." Isabella's wild hazel eyes finally locked onto Keziah's. "Breathe with me. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. Do it." For 10 minutes in the back of a speeding bulletproof car, Keziah held the hands of the most dangerous woman in the city and guided her out of the dark. Slowly, Isabella's breathing regulated. The rigid tension in her muscles melted. When they finally pulled into the estate, Isabella was quiet. She looked down at their joined hands, then up at Keziah. For the first time, there was no hostility in her gaze, just raw, naked vulnerability. "Why did you do that?" Isabella whispered. "You're supposed to hate me." Keziah let go of her hands and offered a small, tired smile. "I don't hate you, Isabella. I think you're just used to people either fearing you or fighting you. I'm not going to do either." As Keziah stepped out of the car, she felt Isabella's eyes on her, heavy and calculating. The war wasn't over, but the rules of engagement had just completely changed. The morning after the shootout, the sprawling Moretti estate felt less like a palace and more like a mausoleum. Security had been tripled. Men with earpieces and suppressed tactical rifles patrolled the rose gardens, their breath visible in the crisp morning air. Keziah stood in the kitchen brewing her cheap instant coffee. She expected Isabella to stay locked in her suite, nursing the trauma of the previous night. Instead, at exactly 8 a.m., the heavy mahogany doors swung open. Isabella walked in. She wasn't wearing her usual intimidating designer armor. She wore an oversized grey cashmere sweater and black leggings. The dark circles under her hazel eyes mirrored Keziah's own exhaustion. She walked straight to the marble island, bypassing the industrial espresso machine, and pointed at Keziah's mug. "Make me one of those," Isabella said. Her voice was flat, stripped of its usual venom. Keziah blinked, surprised. "It's freeze-dried instant. You have a private barista on standby." "I said make me one." Keziah slid a second mug across the counter, spooned in the cheap granules, and poured the boiling water. Isabella took a sip, grimaced slightly at the bitter taste, but didn't complain. She leaned against the counter, watching Keziah with an intense, unnerving calculation. The dynamic had shifted. The feral dog wasn't snapping anymore. It was studying the hand that refused to strike it. "My father is moving against the Calabrese family," Isabella stated abruptly. "Lorenzo Calabrese ordered the hit at the restaurant. It was meant for me." Keziah felt a chill run down her spine, but she kept her face carefully neutral. To survive in this house, she had quickly developed a system to manage the chaos. Keziah's handler protocols **. Rule 1. Never react to the provocation. Emotion is leverage. Giving it away is surrendering power. Rule 2. Maintain eye contact. In a world of predators, looking away is a signal of prey. Rule 3. Speak in facts, not feelings. Rule 4. Protect the schedule. Structure is the only antidote to Isabella's manufactured anarchy. Then it's a good thing your father doubled the perimeter guards, Kezia replied, smoothly referencing her mental checklist. Dr. Harrison is coming at noon to check your vitals after last night's stress. At 2, you have a briefing with Silas Croft regarding the syndicate's front businesses. Isabella laughed, a harsh, dry sound. You're incredible. Bullets fly. I nearly hyperventilate to death in a Maybach, and you're quoting my itinerary. Do you ever crack, Keziah? I don't have the luxury of cracking, Kezia said, meeting her gaze. If I crack, my mother loses her treatment at St. Jude's. So I will be here at noon, and I will be here at 2. For a long moment, Isabella just stared at her. The hostility was gone, replaced by a strange, quiet respect. Silas thinks you're a spy. He told my father it's too convenient that a waitress handled me so easily. He wants to run a deep background check on you. Let him, Kezia said. He'll find a mountain of credit card debt, a Netflix subscription I share with 3 friends, and a rusted Honda Civic. Isabella's lips twitched into the shadow of a smile. I told my father to leave you alone. You're mine to deal with. She set the half-empty mug down. Cancel Dr. Harrison. I'm not sitting in this house waiting to be targeted. We're going out. Mr. Moretti confined you to the estate. I don't care. Isabella interrupted, the old spark of rebellion flaring in her eyes, though this time it felt directed at the world, not at Keziah. If you're my handler, handle me. Get the keys to the Aston Martin. The outing wasn't a reckless joyride. Isabella directed Keziah to drive them to the industrial harbour district, far from the polished wealth of the Moretti territory. They parked near a rusted chain-link fence overlooking the churning grey waters of the bay. The rain had started again, drumming a steady, isolating rhythm against the roof of the car. My mother died out there, Isabella said quietly, staring through the windshield. A boat explosion. Everyone said it was an accident. A gas leak. I was 12. Keziah remained silent, letting the heavy truth fill the confined space of the car. It wasn't an accident, Isabella continued, her voice tightening. It was Lorenzo Calabrese. He wanted to break my father. But instead my father just turned to ice. He built his empire on her ashes, and he expected me to be as cold as he is. But I'm not cold, Kezia. I'm just angry. All the time. Anger is exhausting, Kezia said softly. It burns out the container holding it. Isabella turned to look at her, the proximity in the low-slung car suddenly hyper-intimate. The scent of rain and Isabella's faint, expensive perfume filled the air. Who taught you how to talk down a panic attack? My mother, Kezia admitted, looking down at her hands resting on the steering wheel. When the chemo got really bad, the pain would trigger severe anxiety. I spent 3 years sitting on the edge of hospital beds, holding her hands, counting breaths. Isabella's gaze dropped to Keziah's hands. Slowly, deliberately, she reached out and traced the line of a small burn scar on Keziah's wrist, a souvenir from a frantic shift at the restaurant. The touch was electric, sending a sharp jolt straight up Keziah's arm. You've spent your whole life taking care of broken people, Isabella whispered. Before Kezia could process the sudden shift in the air, her phone vibrated violently against the console. It was Silas Croft. Where are you? Silas's voice barked through the speaker, tight with panic. Taking a drive. Why? Kezia asked, instantly on high alert. Get her back to the estate now. Lorenzo Calabrese just made a move. He hit 3 of our warehouses, and we have chatter that a hit squad has been dispatched for Isabella. They tracked her phone. Keziah's blood ran cold. She looked in the rearview mirror. 2 black, unmarked SUVs with heavily tinted windows had just turned onto the deserted harbour road, accelerating rapidly toward the Aston Martin. "They are here," Keziah said, her voice dropping an octave. She dropped the phone, slammed the car into drive, and floored the accelerator. The Aston Martin roared, fishtailing on the slick, rain-soaked pavement before gripping the asphalt. "Hold on!" Keziah yelled. "They're going to box us in," Isabella shouted, twisting in her seat. The adrenaline was back, but this time the Mafia princess wasn't panicking. She reached under her seat and pulled out a matte black Glock 19. Keziah navigated the tight, labyrinthine harbour roads with reckless precision. The years of driving a failing Honda with bad brakes had ironically taught her how to handle a car on the edge of disaster. The SUVs pursued relentlessly, their heavy frames smashing through wooden crates and debris to keep up. Gunfire shattered the rear window of the Aston Martin. Glass rained down on them. "Keep your head down," Isabella ordered. She rolled down her window, ignoring the freezing rain, leaned out, and fired 3 rapid, deafening shots toward the lead SUV. A tire blew out, and the massive vehicle swerved violently, crashing into a shipping container with a sickening crunch. But the second SUV was right on their bumper. "Take the next left into the alley," Isabella commanded. "It's a dead end, but there's an access tunnel to the old subway lines. My father built it as a stash house." Keziah whipped the steering wheel, throwing the sports car into a narrow, brick-lined alley. She slammed on the brakes just inches from a solid concrete wall. "Out!" "Now!" Isabella yelled. They scrambled out of the car. The second SUV screeched to a halt at the mouth of the alley. 4 men in tactical gear piled out, raising their weapons. Isabella grabbed Keziah's hand, not out of panic, but out of fierce protection, and pulled her toward a rusted iron door disguised as part of the wall. Isabella punched a code into a hidden keypad. The heavy door clicked open. They threw themselves inside just as a hail of bullets chipped the brickwork where they had been standing seconds before. Isabella slammed the door shut and engaged a heavy steel deadbolt. They were plunged into complete suffocating darkness, the sounds of muffled shouting echoing from outside. Keziah was gasping for air, her back pressed against the cold, damp stone of the tunnel. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. In the pitch black, she felt Isabella step closer. The Mafia heir's chest was heaving her presence, a heavy, undeniable heat in the freezing tunnel. "Are you hit?" Isabella asked, her voice breathless and dangerously close. "No," Keziah breathed out. "Are you?" "No." Isabella's hand found Keziah's face in the dark. Her thumb gently brushed a piece of shattered glass from Keziah's cheek. The gesture was shockingly tender for a woman who had just shot out a moving car's tire. "You didn't flinch," Isabella whispered, her face inches from Keziah's. "You never flinch." "I told you," Keziah replied, her voice trembling slightly, betraying the iron facade she had fought so hard to maintain. "I don't back down." Isabella leaned in, closing the final inch between them. "Good." The kiss was desperate, tasting of adrenaline, freezing rainwater, and the sharp copper tang of fear. It wasn't a soft, romantic collision orchestrated by candlelight or soft music. It was a violent, gravity-defying claiming of survival in the pitch-black belly of the city. Isabella's hands gripped the lapels of Keziah's damp, cheap Waitress jacket with white-knuckled intensity, pulling her flush against her chest, anchoring herself to the only steady thing left in her rapidly crumbling world. For Keziah, the rigid professional boundaries she had carefully constructed over the past weeks obliterated in that single, breathless second. She kissed back with equal, unyielding ferocity, her hands tangling in Isabella's wet, dark hair. In the suffocating darkness of the subterranean tunnel, with the muffled, rhythmic thuds of Calabrese-hit men striking the thick concrete walls just yards behind them, the terrifying Mafia princess and the exhausted Waitress finally stripped away the armor they had worn since the night of the spilled Cabernet. The manufactured power dynamic evaporated. There was no wealthy employer, no indentured handler. There were only two women clinging to life in the dark, finding a shocking, undeniable solace in each other's arms. Isabella pulled back slowly, her breathing ragged and shallow. She rested her forehead against Keziah's, her chest heaving against the Waitress's ribcage. The silence between them was profound, heavy with unspoken confessions broken only by the distant rhythmic dripping of water from the arched brick ceiling. "We need to move," Isabella whispered. Her voice was rough, completely stripped of its usual aristocratic polish. "They have heavy breaching tools in those SUVs. It's only a matter of time before they start looking for the access panel we just used." She reached into the pocket of her soaking wet leggings and pulled out a small, military-grade tactical flashlight, clicking it on. The narrow, blinding beam cut through the gloom, revealing a curved, brick-lined utility tunnel that smelled heavily of damp earth rust and old iron. It was a forgotten relic, a remnant of a Prohibition-era smuggling route that Gwen Moretti had quietly purchased and retrofitted for absolute worst-case scenarios. "Stay directly behind me and step exactly where I step," Isabella instructed. The raw vulnerability of the kiss was instantly locked away behind a vault of steel, replaced by pure tactical focus. The Black Widow was back, calculating sharp and lethal. They walked in tense silence for nearly 20 minutes, the distant ghostly rumble of late-night subway trains vibrating through the soles of their shoes. Keziah's mind was racing, the lingering adrenaline still spiking her heart rate. She tried to piece together the fractured timeline of the ambush, her analytical brain desperately seeking order in the chaos. "How did they know? Silas said they tracked your phone," Keziah said softly, her voice echoing slightly off the damp brick walls, breaking the eerie, oppressive silence. "But you left your primary phone, the secure one, on the kitchen counter at the estate. I saw it sitting right next to your coffee mug before we left. You only brought your burner." Isabella stopped dead in her tracks. The flashlight beam bobbed, then steadied on the cracked concrete floor. A burner that runs through a heavily encrypted randomized proxy server routed through 3 different countries, Isabella murmured, her brow furrowing as she aggressively pieced the puzzle together. "The Calabrese tech guys are good, but they aren't crack a military-grade proxy in 10 minutes good. It's mathematically impossible to triangulate that signal so fast." "So how did they find us at the harbor?" Keziah asked, stepping closer to the halo of light. "We didn't tell anyone where we were going. We just drove out there." Isabella turned around slowly, the flashlight illuminating a sharp, terrifying realization dawning on her pale face. "They didn't track me, Keziah. They tracked the car. The Aston Martin has a hardwired GPS locator built directly into the chassis for high-level security." Keziah frowned, shaking her head. "But only the estate's central security hub has access to that feed. The guards don't even have the clearance to monitor your personal vehicles." "Exactly," Isabella said, her voice dropping to a dangerous, icy register that sent a shiver down Keziah's spine. "And the only person who oversees the motor pool security, the only person who knew I specifically told you to get the keys to the Aston Martin this morning, was Silas." "Silas." Keziah breathed the blood suddenly draining from her face, leaving her feeling lightheaded and sick. "He set us up. He sent us out there to die." "It's a coup," Isabella stated, the pieces falling into place with sickening clarity. Silas Croft has been my father's right hand for 2 decades. He's the architect of our supply lines. But my father is getting older. He's talking about succession, and Silas hates me. He truly believes I'm a volatile, psychotic child who will burn the empire to the ground the second I take the throne. If I die in a brazen street hit orchestrated by Lorenzo Calabrese, my father loses his mind. He goes to all-out war. The 2 families destroy each other in the streets, and Silas sweeps in to claim the ashes. He becomes the undisputed boss of the West Coast. Keziah felt a cold sweat break out on the back of her neck. If Silas set us up, and he currently thinks we're dead at the bottom of the harbor, he's going to make his final move on my father tonight. Isabella finished, her eyes flashing with a terrifying, predatory intensity. They surged forward, the urgency doubling their pace, practically jogging through the subterranean gloom. Finally, they reached the end of the tunnel, arriving at a heavy, reinforced steel door that looked like it belonged on a bank vault. Isabella punched a complex 9-digit code into a rusted keypad hidden behind a loose brick. The door hissed open with a pneumatic release, revealing a small, stark safe house equipped with a cot, basic trauma medical supplies, a towering steel weapons locker, and a secure hardwired landline phone resting on a metal desk. Isabella bypassed the medical kit entirely. She walked straight to the landline and dialed a number from memory. It rang 4 agonizing times before a gruff, sleep-heavy voice answered. "Arthur," Isabella said sharply, her tone brooking no argument. "It's Isabella." Arthur Pendleton was one of the few capos Isabella implicitly trusted, a grizzled old-school enforcer in his late 50s who valued loyalty over ambition and carried a classic Smith & Wesson revolver rather than a modern automatic. "Christ almighty, kid. We thought you were dead." Arthur rasped his voice, instantly tight with barely contained panic. "Silas just came back to the estate. He told your dad that the Calabrese boys cornered you at the harbor. He said they found the Aston Martin shot to hell blood all over the passenger seat. Your father, Isabella, he's losing his mind. I'm alive. The blood wasn't mine," Isabella said, her voice remarkably steady, despite the chaos unraveling around her. "Where is my father right now?" "He's gone completely feral, Isabella. Silas convinced him to call an immediate face-to-face parley with Lorenzo Calabrese at the Sterling Club. He told your dad it was a chance to look Lorenzo in the eye, confirm the kill before we burn their entire organization to the ground. But your dad went in light. He only took Silas and 4 guys. He's blindingly grieving. He isn't thinking straight." "It's a trap, Arthur. Silas sold me out to Lorenzo. He fed them my GPS coordinates. They're going to execute my father at the parley tonight and blame it on the Calabrese family to trigger the war." There was a heavy, suffocating silence on the line. Kezia watched Isabella's face. It was carved from marble, completely devoid of the panic that usually governed her. Then the distinct metallic sound of a gun slide racking echoed through the phone speaker. "Where do you need me, boss?" Arthur asked. Boss. The word hung heavy in the stale air of the safe house. Not kid, not princess, not liability. Boss. Gather every single man strictly loyal to you. Do not use the main comms and do not alert the estate. Silas likely has loyalists monitoring the radios. Isabella ordered, her strategic mind working at lightning speed. Meet me at the rear service entrance of the Sterling Club in exactly 15 minutes. Bring heavy armor. We are taking the house back tonight. Done, Arthur said, and the line went dead. Isabella slammed the receiver down and turned her attention to the massive steel weapons locker. She spun the combination dial, throwing the heavy latch open to reveal an arsenal of tactical gear ammunition and matte black weaponry. She grabbed 2 loaded magazines, sliding them expertly into her Glock 19, and racked the slide with a satisfying metallic clack. Then she reached into the locker and pulled out a heavy standard-issue Kevlar vest. She turned and tossed it directly at Kezia. Kezia caught the heavy vest, the dense weight of the ballistic armor pulling at her tired arms. Her hands were trembling slightly as she looked down at the black material. "Put this on," Isabella commanded, her tone leaving no room for negotiation. "Isabella, I'm a waitress." Kezia said, her voice wavering as the sheer gravity of the situation finally crashed down on her shoulders. "I balance trays. I memorize wine lists and calculate tips. I can't shoot a gun. I don't belong in a mafia shootout." Isabella walked over, closing the distance between them. Her hazel eyes were completely devoid of the chaotic, unhinged anger that used to define her every waking moment. Instead, she looked profoundly grounded, lethally calm, and devastatingly clear-headed. She didn't offer empty reassurances or placating lies. She reached out, grabbing the thick Velcro straps of Kezia's vest, pulling them tight across the waitress's torso and securing them with a harsh, tearing sound. "I know exactly who you are," Isabella said softly, looking deeply into Kezia's wide, frightened eyes. "But you don't have to shoot anyone tonight. You don't have to be an enforcer, and you don't have to pull a trigger. You just have to do exactly what you do best." Kezia swallowed hard, her throat painfully dry. "What is that?" Isabella let her hands rest on the shoulders of Kezia's armored vest, her touch grounding and firm. "Don't back down. Keep your eyes open, and stay by my side. You are the only thing keeping me anchored to the earth right now, Kezia. I need my handler." Kezia took a deep, shuddering breath. She thought of her mother resting safely in the hospital bed, her treatments fully paid for by the very man who was currently walking into a death trap. She thought of the terrifying, broken, brilliant woman standing in front of her, asking for her help. The paralyzing fear didn't vanish, but it hardened into something useful. It hardened into an unbreakable resolve. Kezia nodded once her trembling hands finally going still. "Okay, let's go save your father." The Sterling Club, situated on the most heavily surveilled affluent stretch of the city's financial district, was an architectural marvel of dark oak brass fixtures and velvet drapery. It was a sanctuary exclusively reserved for the city's corrupt elite, a place where senators and syndicate bosses alike sipped $1,000 scotch and carved up the city without leaving a paper trail. Tonight, however, the opulent fortress was nothing more than a graveyard waiting to happen. The rain poured in relentless, blinding sheets as Isabella and Kezia slipped through the kitchen's rear loading dock. The heavy steel door clicked shut behind them, shutting out the roar of the storm. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of roasted lamb-white truffles and terrified sweat. The Michelin star executive chef and his staff were huddled in the corner of the massive industrial kitchen, their hands raised, eyes wide with horror, as Arthur Pendleton and 6 heavily armed loyalists secured the perimeter. Arthur, a grizzled veteran of the Underworld, who moved with terrifying, silent efficiency, gestured toward the swinging doors that led to the front of the house. "The main dining room," Arthur whispered, his voice a low gravel rasp that barely carried over the hum of the commercial refrigerators. "Silas and your dad are in there with Lorenzo Calabrese and his top brass." Silas dismissed the outer perimeter guards entirely. He told them it was a respect thing, a gesture of goodwill to the Calabrese family. They bought it. The floor is completely empty except for the men inside that room. Isabella drew her matte black Glock 19, holding it flush against her thigh. She didn't look like a spoiled heiress anymore. She looked like an executioner. The chaotic, fiery rage that had defined her entire life had burned away, leaving behind something far colder and infinitely more dangerous. She looked at Arthur, giving him a curt nod, and then turned her gaze to Keziah. Kezia Bennett stood amidst the stainless steel prep tables, a woman who mere weeks ago was calculating the agonizing mathematics of poverty in a stained apron. Now the heavy Kevlar vest dug into her ribs beneath her damp jacket. Her hands were cold, her pulse drumming a frantic rhythm in her throat, but her mind was entirely clear. "Nobody fires unless I do," Isabella commanded, her voice slicing through the heavy silence of the kitchen. "Arthur, you take the left flank. Pin Lorenzo's guards down. Leave Silas to me." Isabella stepped closer to Keziah, lifting a hand to gently cup her jaw. The touch was fleeting, a sharp contrast to the lethal weapon in her other hand. "Stay behind me. If anything goes wrong, you follow Arthur out the loading dock. You do not look back. Do you understand? I'm not leaving you." Keziah replied, her voice barely above a whisper, but laced with pure steel. "We finish this together, just like we started it." Isabella's lips twitched into the shadow of a proud smile. She turned away, her demeanor instantly hardening back into the Black Widow. They moved silently through the swinging doors, bypassing the abandoned mahogany bar, and approaching the grand gold-leafed double doors of the private dining hall. The thick wood muffled the voices inside, but the tension radiating from the room was palpable, seeping under the doorframe like toxic gas. Isabella didn't pause. She didn't hesitate or take a deep breath to steady her nerves. She raised her boot and kicked the double doors open with a deafening crash that echoed like a bomb blast across the high ceilings. The scene inside froze, suspended in a horrifying tableau. Gwen Moretti sat at the head of a 20-foot mahogany table. The undisputed king of the West Coast Syndicate looked 10 years older than he had that morning. His broad shoulders slumped, his eyes hollow and red-rimmed with the agonizing belief that his only child had been slaughtered at the harbor. Across from him sat Lorenzo Calabrese, impeccably dressed in a charcoal Brioni suit, a heavy Patek Philippe watch catching the dim light as he held a snifter of cognac. He looked tense, calculating, but not victorious. Standing directly behind Gwen, his hand resting casually inside his tailored suit jacket, was Silas Croft. The underboss looked triumphant, a cruel smirk playing on his lips as he lorded over the broken king. "Isabella." Gwen breathed the word tearing from his throat. He rose slowly from his chair, his hands shaking so violently he knocked over a crystal water glass. Silas's smug expression dissolved into sheer, unadulterated panic. The blood drained from his face, leaving him a sickly ashen grey. In a split second of desperate self-preservation, Silas drew his weapon, aiming it directly at the back of Gwen's head. "Don't move! Nobody move!" Silas roared, his voice cracking with hysteria. Lorenzo's bodyguards immediately drew their weapons, but Arthur and his crew flooded the room like a tactical strike force. Laser sights painted the chests of the Calabrese men before they could even flick off their safeties. "Put them down, Lorenzo," Isabella said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried an icy authority that demanded absolute obedience. "Or nobody leaves this room breathing. Not you. Not your men. Tell them to drop the guns." Lorenzo, a shrewd survivor who had not lived to his 60s by making foolish gambles, looked at the half-dozen assault rifles trained on his men, then at the bleeding traitor standing behind Gwen. He slowly lowered his cognac glass to the table and raised his hand. "Stand down," he ordered his men. The heavy thuds of weapons hitting the Persian rug echoed through the room. "This is a mistake," Silas screamed, pressing the barrel of his gun against Gwen's graying hair. Sweat poured down his face, ruining his collar. "She's a psycho, Lorenzo. We had a deal. You take the docks, I take the family. If she lives, she'll burn our truce to the ground." Isabella walked forward, her heels clicking methodically against the hardwood floor, a steady, terrifying metronome. 30 years, Dom," Silas yelled, turning his frantic eyes to the boss he was holding hostage. 30 years I bled for this family. I built our supply lines, I laundered the cash, and you were going to hand the keys to the kingdom to a spoiled, volatile brat who couldn't even keep her own bodyguards out of the hospital. She's a liability. I did this for the family. You did this because you are small, Silas, Isabella said smoothly, stopping 10 feet away from him. She kept her Glock aimed squarely at his chest. You did this because you knew the moment my father stepped down, I would look at the books. I would see the millions you've been skimming from the construction fronts in the South End. You didn't orchestrate a coup for the good of the family. You did it to cover your own pathetic theft. Silas's eyes darted wildly. Shut up. You don't know anything. I know that your hit squad missed. Isabella said, her hazel eyes completely dead. I know that you handed Lorenzo my location as a peace offering to mask your treason. And I know that your hand is shaking. I'll pull the trigger, Silas shrieked, pressing the gun harder against Gwen. I have 20 men waiting outside. If I don't walk out of here, they come in and slaughter everyone. For a fraction of a second, a flicker of doubt crossed Gwen's face. But Kezia, standing just a few paces behind Isabella, narrowed her eyes. She had spent years analyzing the body language of liars, cheats, and desperate men in the restaurant industry. She looked at Silas, noting the sweat soaking through his shirt, the frantic darting movement of his eyes, and the way he was favoring his left leg, a telltale sign of a man preparing to run. Not fight. He's lying, Isabella, Kezia said. Her voice was incredibly calm, cutting through the hysteria of the room like a silver blade. Silas snapped his head toward Kezia. Shut your mouth, Waitress. He's completely bluffing. Kezia continued, stepping slightly to the side to give Isabella a clearer line of sight. Arthur already confirmed the perimeter was empty. Silas sent his own men away, so there would be no witnesses to his betrayal. He doesn't have backup. He's completely alone. Silas's momentary distraction, the split second he took to process Kezia's deduction, was all the Black Widow needed. Isabella didn't hesitate. She raised her weapon and fired twice in rapid succession. The first hollow-point bullet shattered Silas's right shoulder, snapping his collarbone and forcing his hand to release the weapon before his brain could command his finger to pull the trigger. The gun clattered uselessly to the floor. The second bullet took him in the right kneecap. Silas collapsed to the rug with a shrieking wet gasp, his body contorting in agony as dark blood instantly pooled on the intricate floral patterns of the carpet. Gwen stepped away from the falling man, breathing heavily. His eyes locked on his daughter. Isabella didn't even flinch. She kept her gun raised, tracking Silas as he writhed on the floor, before slowly turning the barrel toward Lorenzo Calabrese. Lorenzo stiffened, holding his hands up in a gesture of absolute surrender. This wasn't my hit, Isabella. I swear on my mother's grave. Silas came to me. He said you were planning a preemptive strike on our warehouses. He offered your location at the harbor to prevent a war. I took the bait to protect my own. I had no part in his coup against your father. Isabella stared at Lorenzo for a long, suffocating moment. The tension in the room was so thick, it felt like trying to breathe underwater. There will be a new tax on your port shipments, starting tomorrow morning, Lorenzo. Isabella stated her tone, leaving zero room for negotiation. A 30% penalty for entertaining a traitor and firing on my car. You will cede control of the garment district fronts by midnight. If you argue, if you hesitate, I won't call a parley next time. I will simply burn your house down with you inside it." Lorenzo studied the young woman standing before him. He recognized the dawn of a new, far more ruthless era for the Moretti family. He swallowed hard and nodded slowly. "We'll pay the tax. You have my word." "Get out of my sight," Isabella commanded. As Lorenzo and his men rapidly filed out of the room under Arthur's watchful rifles, Gwen looked down at Silas, who was groaning and clutching his shattered knee. The betrayal in the old boss's eyes was absolute, a profound sadness mixing with cold realization. He gestured to Arthur, who dragged Silas out of the room by his collar, leaving a thick smear of crimson across the floor. Gwen turned back to his daughter. He expected to see the wild, uncontrollable girl who threw tantrums and broke things. Instead, he saw a queen who had just surgically dismantled a coup, negotiated a massive territorial gain, and saved his life without breaking a single sweat. Then Gwen's gaze shifted to the woman standing quietly behind Isabella. Kezia Bennett. She was unarming herself casually, stripping off the heavy Kevlar vest, with steady hands, her eyes calm and watchful. Gwen finally understood. Kezia hadn't just handled his daughter. She had tempered the steel. She had focused the chaotic, destructive blade into a scalpel. "I'm stepping down," Gwen said quietly, the fight finally leaving his weary bones. He looked from the blood on the floor back to Isabella. "I'm tired, Izzy. This life, it takes everything. And you're ready to take the crown." Isabella lowered her gun. She didn't smile, nor did she gloat. She simply stepped forward and pulled her father into a fierce, tight embrace. "I know," she whispered. 6 months later, the Obsidian Room was completely closed to the public for a private event. The jazz pianist was playing a soft, sultry melody that drifted through the candlelit dining room. The staff moved with terrified, flawless precision, but the atmosphere was fundamentally different now. There was no chaotic energy or fear of flying plates or sudden violence. Kezia Bennett sat in the center VIP booth, sipping a glass of exquisitely rare Chateau Margaux 2015. She wasn't wearing a stained white apron. She wore a tailored midnight blue silk dress that draped perfectly across her shoulders, her hair swept up elegantly. A delicate Cartier diamond bracelet caught the candlelight on her wrist. Her life had changed astronomically. Her mother was 5 months into complete remission, resting comfortably at a private, state-of-the-art recovery estate on the coast overseen by the best oncologists money could buy. The suffocating weight of debt and fear was nothing more than a ghost of the past. The heavy mahogany doors of the restaurant opened, and the room went dead silent. Isabella Moretti walked in. She was no longer just the heir. She was the undisputed head of the syndicate, feared, deeply respected, and brilliantly controlled. She was flanked by guards who looked at her, not with anxiety, but with absolute, unflinching loyalty. She walked past the empty tables, dismissing her security detail with a flick of her hand, and slid into the leather booth next to Kezia. The hard, intimidating lines of her face, the mask of the Black Widow, immediately softened into a warm, genuine smile that only one person in the entire world was ever allowed to see. "Long day of running the city?" Kezia asked, a playful smirk dancing on her lips as she handed Isabella a menu. Isabella didn't look at the menu. She leaned in, closing the distance between them, and pressed a soft, lingering kiss to Kezia's jawline, right over the faint, fading scar of a restaurant burn. "It is now," Isabella murmured, her voice a low, rough purr. She reached down, lacing her fingers perfectly through Kezia's. "But I think my handler has things completely under control." Kezia smiled, leaning her head against Isabella's shoulder as she took a slow sip of her dark wine. "I always do. Did your heart stop during that final explosive standoff? If the dangerous electric romance between the Black Widow and the fearless Waitress kept you glued to the screen, don't let the story end here. Hit that like button right now to show your support, and share this video with fellow fans of high-stakes enemies-to-lovers mafia drama. We drop real-life-inspired, pulse-pounding thrillers just like this every single week, so make sure to smash that subscribe button and ring the notification bell.